Labour Party has called for an inquiry into allegations of sexual harassment and abuse at top private schools. It comes as a senior police chief predicted a significant number of reports of sexual abuse would likely emerge and has suggested that some schools could have covered up offences. We can speak to Chief Constable Simon Bailey, who made those comments. Chief Constable, thank you very much for joining us today. We'll talk about the issue of private schools and whether it's a much wider problem in just a moment. But first, given that you're going to be looking at these allegations, and already we've got these thousands of anonymous testimonies via the Everyone's Invited website, what's your reaction to that? Was it unexpected to see those numbers, or does it not surprise you?
I think what I'd like to do is to take you back to late 2016 into 2017 and what we saw when Andy Woodward appeared on a television programme and disclosed abuse as a young trainee footballer. And what that then led to was an outpouring of concern and then hundreds of victims coming forward and reporting abuse. And what Soma Sara has done with the Everyone's Invited website and her own testimony of a sexual assault, she has opened the door and given victims the courage and the confidence to come forward and post testimonies on the website about their abuse. So I'm not surprised. It is absolutely not confined to the private school sector, far from it. I don't doubt that this goes right across the whole of the education sector, private schools, academies, state schools, and into universities. And the numbers that we're talking about now have doubled in the space of a week. The number of testimonies on the website now exceeds 8,000. This time last week, it was just over 4,000. So it gives you some idea of the number of people that are now coming forward and talking about what has happened to them.
Can you give us an idea of the spectrum that this goes across? I'm assuming it's people in positions of authority, pupils themselves, people maybe related to the school who aren't teachers. It's completely that wide-ranging.
It's predominantly and overwhelming focused upon peer-on-peer abuse, and it's abuse that is taking place within school settings, but also lots and lots of accounts of abuse outside of the school setting as well, at parties, in parks, in people's homes, when people are intoxicated. And what we are seeing is people disclosing harassment at one end of the spectrum right up to what clearly is rape at the other end of the spectrum. So it is the complete, broad disclosure of abuse. Misogyny is commonplace, and what it is, it's an outpouring of overwhelmingly young ladies and more mature ladies now that are probably no longer in education, like Soma, that are now recording and recalling the abuse and the harassment that they were exposed to as young women.
When we look at the Everyone's Invited website, 100 or so private schools, 75 state schools named. So as you say, it's across the spectrum of education. But given how small a number of people actually go to private schools, the fact that there are more of them named, why do you think that is?
I don't think that's anything more than timing, if I'm being honest. That the movement, if you like, had its foundations within the private school sector. Soma was in a private school. And I think that encouraged a number of private school students to come and talk about their experiences. But what we are now seeing is an exponential increase in the number of people posting testimonies. And inevitably, that will see, I suspect, a rebalance in the profile. It was focused originally on the private school sector, but I don't think anybody should be in any doubt at all that it goes right across the whole of the sector. And it will also lead to disclosures and reports of people that are no longer in education, but people that sustained some form of harassment or abuse whilst they were in education.
You said in an interview with The Times, quote, "Do I think there will be circumstances where abuse will have been covered up to protect reputations? Yes, I do," end quote. Does that speak to the fact that you also believe that this is a problem that's been long running and should have been addressed a lot earlier?
Well, so I'm basing that statement not on evidence, although there would be some evidence from serious case reviews about information not being shared from schools, but what we saw during the football crisis. Clubs undoubtedly didn't deal with allegations of abuse of their trainees, of their young men at the time, and I have no reason to think that is not being replicated within the school sector. In terms of, sorry, could you just go back to the second element of the question?
Yes, it was just that given the quote about, the circumstances where abuse will have been covered up, do you think it's something, I just asked, do you think it's something that should have been addressed a lot earlier, given that you think that it's likely, again, no evidence, specific evidence, but it's likely to have been covered up, that it should have been dealt with a long time ago?
Look, whenever these cases have been reported, they should be being dealt with. And the appropriate protocols, the arrangements, the expectations that exist of the safeguarding needs enforcers of school heads is very, very clear. But what clearly is now being brought to the fore is what I would describe as an erosion of what normal, healthy relationships look like, an erosion of what normal sexual relationships would look like. And I think this is just the culmination of a build-up of many, many years of the erosion of what normal is and what is acceptable is. And I think you have to look at what is going on more broadly in society in terms of people's habits in viewing pornography online and the availability of pornography, what young men are now seeing as being normal. And it's difficult. We have to recognise that it's difficult for parents to have those conversations with their children. What are you viewing online? What kind of videos do you have on your smartphone? What do you recognise as being normal and acceptable? What are your values around how you would engage with members of the opposite sex, for example? And I think
just on that, the cultural, the culture aspect of it. Do you think that is also then a failure of, as you've pointed out, wider society, but schools themselves? Given that the nature of a lot of these claims are peer-to-peer, that culture that's built up around what people are viewing and pornography and the sexualization of women in particular, that's something that hasn't been dealt with by the schools themselves, potentially.
Well, I think that we can't say everybody's failed here, but what I think we have to now look at is how strong are the cultures in school where misogyny is simply just not accepted. Is the young boy that flicks up the skirt of the young lady with the hockey stick, is that being challenged by the teachers in that environment, or is it just being laughed off? And I think that for me is the key thing. And if the culture within a school makes it very clear that misogyny is not tolerated, sexual harassment is not tolerated, sexual abuse is not tolerated, then all of a sudden we start to then redefine the boundaries. But I think we have to recognise that those boundaries have definitely been more than blurred. They have been expanded to the point where there is no true appreciation or understanding of actually misogynistic behaviour, sexual harassment, and on occasions sexual assault either.
Chief Constable Simon Bailey, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us.